The bullies had no idea, they just picked on the wrong quiet kid. What happened next left everyone speechless. Marcus Valdez had perfected the art of being invisible. At 17, he was thin as a rail, barely 5'6", with thick-rimmed glasses that perpetually slid down his nose, and a habit of keeping his head down when he walked through the hallways of Jefferson High School. His oversized sweaters hung loose on his frame, and his black hair fell in messy waves across his forehead, creating a curtain he could hide behind. To most people, he looked like exactly what he was trying to appear: a harmless, bookish kid who wouldn't hurt a fly. What they didn't know was that Marcus had been training in mixed martial arts since he was 8 years old. His grandfather, a former boxing champion in Mexico, had taught him that true strength came from discipline and control, not from showing off. El poder real no necesita gritar, his grandfather would say. Real power doesn't need to shout. Marcus had taken those words to heart, especially after what happened at his old school. 3 years ago, Marcus had lost control during a fight with a bully. What started as self-defense had ended with the other kid in the hospital with a broken nose and fractured ribs. The guilt had eaten at Marcus for months. He'd made a promise to himself and his grandfather that he would never let his anger control him again. So when his family moved to Jefferson, Marcus decided to become someone different, someone quiet, someone who wouldn't attract trouble. But trouble had a way of finding him anyway. Cody Brennan ruled Jefferson High like a king holding court. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and arms covered in tattoos he'd gotten from his older brother's friend, Cody commanded respect through fear. His bleached hair was always perfectly styled, and he wore his Letterman jacket even in 90-degree weather. He had 2 constant companions: Jake Morrison, a stocky redhead with a mean streak, and Tyler Banks, tall and lanky with dead eyes that seemed to find amusement in other people's pain. Jefferson High School sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling brick building with long corridors that echoed with the sound of slamming lockers and teenage conversations. The cafeteria was a battleground of social hierarchies. The gymnasium smelled permanently of sweat and disinfectant, and the parking lot was where reputations were made and destroyed. Marcus had managed to stay under Cody's radar for almost 2 months. He ate lunch alone in the library, took routes through the building that avoided the main hallways, and never made eye contact with anyone who looked like they might cause trouble. It was a carefully orchestrated dance of avoidance that had worked perfectly until the day he accidentally walked into Cody's path near the water fountains. "Watch where you're going, Four Eyes," Cody had said, shoving Marcus hard enough to send his books scattering across the floor. A few students had stopped to watch, their faces showing that familiar mixture of relief that it wasn't them and guilt that they weren't helping. Marcus had simply gathered his books and walked away without a word. But that reaction, that refusal to engage, had somehow made Cody angrier than if Marcus had fought back. "You ignoring me?" Cody had called after him, his voice carrying down the hallway. "Nobody ignores me in my school." That was the beginning of the end of Marcus's peaceful existence at Jefferson High. The incident started small. Cody would shoulder-check Marcus in the hallways, just hard enough to make him stumble. He'd knock books out of Marcus's hands as he passed. During lunch, if Marcus tried to sit anywhere in the cafeteria, Cody would appear with his crew and make it clear that Marcus wasn't welcome. "This table's taken," Jake would say with a grin that showed too many teeth. "Whole cafeteria's taken," Tyler would add, cracking his knuckles. Marcus would simply nod and leave, usually ending up eating his sandwich on the front steps of the school or not eating at all. He told himself he was being smart, avoiding escalation. His grandfather's voice echoed in his head. "A wise man walks away from a fight he doesn't need to win." But Cody's attention was like a spotlight that Marcus couldn't escape. The bigger boy seemed to take Marcus's passivity as a personal challenge. The harassment escalated from bumps and shoves to more deliberate humiliations. During chemistry class, Marcus arrived to find his lab station covered in what looked like blood, but smelled like ketchup. The teacher, Mr. Harrison, a tired man in his 50s who'd clearly given up on controlling his classroom years ago, just sighed and told Marcus to clean it up. Cody and his friends snickered from the back of the room. In the locker room after mandatory PE, Marcus discovered his clothes had been soaked with something that smelled like rotten eggs. He'd had to walk around for the rest of the day smelling like sulfur, enduring the wrinkled noses and whispered comments from other students. The worst part wasn't the pranks themselves. It was the way other students had started to look at him, some with pity, others with the kind of disgust reserved for roadkill. Marcus had become the school's designated victim, and everyone knew it. "Why don't you just fight back?" asked Elena Rodriguez, a girl from his English class who'd been kind enough to lend him her notes when his had been accidentally thrown in the trash. They were sitting in the library during lunch, speaking in whispers between the stacks. Marcus adjusted his glasses and stared at his untouched sandwich. "It's not that simple. He's just a bully," Elena pressed. "Bullies back down when you stand up to them." If only she knew, Marcus thought. If only any of them knew that he could probably take Cody and his friends apart without breaking a sweat. But the image of his former victim lying in that hospital bed, the sound of his mother crying on the phone, the look of disappointment in his grandfather's eyes, it all came rushing back. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said quietly. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. "Maybe," she said finally. "But what if not fighting back is what's really hurting people?" That afternoon, Marcus found his backpack hanging from the flagpole in the school courtyard, 30 feet off the ground. His homework, his notes, his textbooks, everything was inside that bag. A small crowd had gathered to watch, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable but not doing anything to help. Cody and his crew were leaning against the wall nearby, clearly pleased with their handiwork. "Oops," Cody said with mock innocence when he saw Marcus approaching. "Looks like someone dropped their bag. Weird how it ended up all the way up there." Marcus stared up at the flagpole. His chemistry homework was due next period. His history report was due tomorrow. Everything he needed for his classes was in that bag. "You gonna cry?" Tyler asked, pulling out his phone to record. "This is going to be hilarious." Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, a familiar heat that he'd worked so hard to suppress. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel his training kicking in, his body automatically shifting into a more balanced stance. Then he thought about his grandfather's words. He thought about his promise. He thought about the kid in the hospital bed. "No," he said quietly, and walked away. But as he left, he heard Cody's voice behind him. "Tomorrow, we're gonna have some real fun." That night, Marcus called his grandfather. He told him about the flagpole, about the months of harassment, about the way other students looked at him now. "Mijo," his grandfather said, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes, "there's a difference between being a bully and being a warrior. A bully fights to hurt. A warrior fights to protect." "But what if I lose control again?" "Control is not about never getting angry," his grandfather said. "Control is about choosing what you do with that anger. You have a gift, Marcus. You can protect yourself and others, but you've been so afraid of becoming a monster that you've forgotten how to be a man." The next morning, Marcus walked into Jefferson High School, knowing that something had changed. He could feel it in the way he carried himself, in the steadiness of his breathing, in the quiet confidence that had replaced the constant knot of anxiety in his stomach. He made it through first period without incident. During the break between classes, he was walking past the gymnasium when he heard a commotion from inside. Through the half-open door, he could see Cody and his friends surrounding a smaller kid, a freshman, maybe 14 years old, with red hair and freckles. "Please," the kid was saying, his voice shaking. "I already gave you my lunch money yesterday." "That was yesterday," Cody said, grabbing the kid's backpack and dumping its contents on the floor. Today's a new day. Jake kicked the kids' notebooks across the gym floor while Tyler laughed. The freshman was trying not to cry, but Marcus could see the tears starting to form in his eyes. "I don't have any more money," the kid whispered. "Then I guess you're gonna have to find some," Cody said, shoving the kid hard enough to send him stumbling backwards. "Or we're gonna have to get creative about how you pay us back." Marcus stood in the doorway watching. This was the moment Elena had been talking about. This was what his grandfather meant about being a warrior. The kid looked up and saw Marcus standing there. For a moment their eyes met. The freshman's expression was pure desperation, a silent plea for help from someone, anyone, who might have the power to stop what was happening. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped into the gymnasium. "Hey," he said quietly. Cody turned around, a grin spreading across his face when he saw who it was. Well, look who decided to join the party. You want to watch me teach this little punk a lesson?" "Let him go," Marcus said, his voice still quiet, but carrying a new quality that made Jake and Tyler exchange glances. Cody laughed. "Let him go? You think you're gonna make me?" "I'm asking you nicely," Marcus said, taking another step forward. "Just let him go." "Or what?" Cody demanded, puffing out his chest. "You gonna do something about it, Four Eyes?" Marcus looked at the freshman, still on the ground, still shaking. He looked at Cody, so sure of his power, so used to getting his way through intimidation. He thought about his grandfather's words. "A warrior fights to protect." "Yeah," Marcus said, reaching up to take off his glasses and fold them carefully. "I think I am." The change in Marcus was immediate and dramatic. Without his glasses, his eyes were sharp and focused, his posture straightened, his shoulders squared, and suddenly he didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked dangerous. Cody's grin faltered slightly. "You serious right now?" Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he moved, not rushed, not angry, but with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent years training for exactly this moment. Cody swung first, a wild haymaker that Marcus saw coming from a mile away. Marcus slipped to the side, letting the punch whistle past his ear, then grabbed Cody's extended arm and twisted, using the bigger boy's momentum against him. Cody hit the gym floor hard, his breath leaving his lungs in a whoosh. Jake rushed forward, but Marcus was already moving. A quick jab to Jake's solar plexus doubled him over, and a knee to his face sent him sprawling next to his leader. Tyler, seeing his two friends on the ground, pulled out a switchblade. "Back off, man! I'll cut you!" The appearance of the knife changed everything. This wasn't just a schoolyard fight anymore. This was serious. Marcus could feel his training taking over completely now, his body moving with lethal efficiency. He feinted left, then spun right, his legs sweeping Tyler's feet out from under him. As Tyler fell, Marcus caught his wrist, twisted sharply, and the knife clattered away across the gym floor. Tyler screamed as something in his wrist popped. The whole thing had taken less than 30 seconds. Cody was trying to get back to his feet, his face red with rage and embarrassment. "You think you're tough?" he spat, blood running from his nose. "You think this is over?" Marcus looked down at him, his expression calm but his eyes blazing with controlled fire. "It's over if you want it to be over." "This isn't over," Cody said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Not even close." "Yes," Marcus said quietly, "it is." He reached down and grabbed Cody by the front of his shirt, lifting him effortlessly to his feet. For a moment, they were face to face, and Cody saw something in Marcus's eyes that made him take an involuntary step backward. "You're going to leave him alone," Marcus said, nodding toward the freshman, who was still sitting on the floor, staring in amazement. "You're going to leave me alone. You're going to leave everyone alone." "You can't tell me what to do," Cody said, but his voice was shaking now. Marcus leaned in closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been training since I was 8 years old. Mixed martial arts, boxing, Jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai. I could have put you in the hospital just now, but I chose not to. Next time I might not be so generous." Cody's eyes widened. He looked at Jake, still groaning on the floor, then at Tyler, who was cradling his injured wrist. You're crazy." "No," Marcus said, putting his glasses back on. "I'm tired." He turned to the freshman and helped him to his feet. "You okay?" The kid nodded, unable to speak. "What's your name?" "Danny," the kid managed. "Danny, if anyone bothers you again, you come find me, okay?" Danny nodded again, then hurried to gather his scattered belongings and flee the gymnasium. Marcus looked back at Cody and his crew, all three of them looking like they'd seen a ghost. "We're done here." As he walked toward the exit, Cody called after him, "This isn't over, Valdez." Marcus paused in the doorway and looked back. "Yes, it is. But if you want to try again, you know where to find me." By lunchtime, word had spread through Jefferson High like wildfire. Marcus Valdez, the quiet kid who'd been getting picked on for months, had taken down Cody Brennan and his entire crew single-handedly. The story grew with each telling. Some said he'd used kung fu, others claimed he was some kind of ninja. Marcus found himself at the center of attention for the first time in his life. Students who'd never spoken to him before suddenly wanted to be his friend. Girls who'd looked right through him were now smiling and saying hello. Even some of the teachers seemed to regard him with new respect. But the person whose opinion mattered most to him was Elena Rodriguez. "I heard what happened," she said, sliding into the seat across from him in the cafeteria. Marcus looked up from his sandwich. "Yeah? You stood up for Danny Patterson. That was really brave." "I just did what anyone should have done." Elena smiled. "No, you did what you should have done. There's a difference." That afternoon, Marcus was walking to his locker when he saw Cody waiting for him. For a moment, Marcus tensed, ready for round two, but Cody looked different now, smaller somehow, less sure of himself. "Hey," Cody said as Marcus approached. "Hey." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Finally, Cody spoke. "Look, I wanted to say something." Marcus waited. "I'm sorry," Cody said, the words coming out in a rush. "About all the stuff I did to you. The flagpole thing, the locker room, all of it. It was messed up." Marcus studied Cody's face, looking for signs of deception. But the other boy seemed genuine, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked like actual remorse. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why what? Why did you do it? I never did anything to you." Cody was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said finally. I guess I liked feeling like I was in control, like I had power over someone. And now," Cody looked down at his hands, "now I know what it feels like to be on the other side." Marcus nodded slowly. "So what happens now?" "I don't know," Cody admitted. "I guess I try to be better." "Good," Marcus said. "That's all any of us can do." As Cody walked away, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed at Jefferson High. It wasn't just that he'd stood up to the school's biggest bully. It was that he'd shown everyone, including himself, that there was another way to be strong. Over the following weeks, Marcus noticed other changes too. Students who'd been picking on underclassmen suddenly found themselves facing unexpected resistance. Kids who'd been too scared to speak up before were finding their voices. Danny Patterson, the freshman Marcus had helped, was now walking with his head held high. Marcus didn't become the new school tough guy. He didn't want that role. Instead, he became something better, a protector. When he saw injustice, he stepped in. When he saw someone being picked on, he intervened. But he did it with the wisdom his grandfather had taught him, using just enough force to stop the problem, never more. "You found your balance," his grandfather said during one of their weekly phone calls. "You learned the difference between being feared and being respected." "I think I finally understand what you meant," Marcus said, "about real power not needing to shout." See, mijo, the strongest warriors are the ones who only fight when they must and who know when to show mercy. 3 months later, Marcus was sitting in the school courtyard reading a book when a shadow fell across his page. He looked up to see Cody standing there, but this time he wasn't alone. Jake and Tyler were with him, along with Danny Patterson and several other students. "Hey, Marcus," Cody said, "we wanted to ask you something." Marcus closed his book and looked up. "What's that?" "We're starting a club," Danny said, stepping forward. "An anti-bullying club. We want to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other kids. And we want you to be our advisor," Cody added. "I mean, if you want to." Marcus looked around at the group of faces, former bullies and former victims now standing together. "What would we do?" "Mediation," Elena said, appearing from behind the group. "Conflict resolution. Teaching people how to solve problems without violence." "But also," Jake added, "teaching people how to defend themselves if they need to." Marcus smiled. "I think that sounds like a pretty good idea." The Jefferson High Anti-Bullying Club met every Thursday after school in the library. Marcus taught self-defense techniques, but he also taught something more important: how to de-escalate conflicts, how to stand up for others, and how to find strength in community rather than in dominance. Cody proved to be one of the most dedicated members. He'd taken Marcus's lesson to heart and was working hard to become someone better than he'd been. He started tutoring younger students and became a mentor to kids who were struggling socially. "I spent so long trying to be tough," he told Marcus one day after a club meeting. "I didn't realize that being kind was actually harder." "Harder," Marcus agreed, "but more rewarding." By the end of the school year, Jefferson High had become a different place. Bullying incidents had dropped dramatically. Students were more likely to help each other than to tear each other down. And Marcus had found something he'd never expected: a sense of purpose. At graduation, Marcus was chosen to give a speech to the underclassmen. He stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and thought about how far he'd come. "A year ago," he began, "I thought strength meant never showing weakness. I thought the best way to avoid conflict was to make myself invisible. I was wrong about both of those things." He paused, looking out at the crowd, seeing familiar faces. Danny Patterson, now confident and smiling. Elena Rodriguez, who'd become one of his closest friends. Even Jake and Tyler, who'd learned to channel their energy into positive directions. "Real strength," Marcus continued, "isn't about how hard you can hit or how much you can intimidate others. Real strength is about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. It's about choosing to be kind, even when it's hard." He found Cody in the crowd, and the two boys nodded at each other. "I learned that the hard way," Marcus said, "but I'm glad I learned it, because now I know that the strongest thing you can do is help others find their own strength." As he walked off the stage, Marcus felt his grandfather's presence with him, proud and approving. He'd found his balance at last. Not the careful, fearful avoidance he'd practiced for months, but the true equilibrium of someone who knew his own power and chose to use it wisely. The bullies had picked on the wrong kid, all right. But in the end, it wasn't because Marcus could fight. It was because he'd learned when not to fight, and that had made all the difference.